Welcome back to the History of Early Western Civilization. This is Professor Allen, and here is Lecture Day 21. And so we left off here, and I'm going to quickly cover it again, just to quickly explain things so you understand kind of what ends up happening again. And so we end up having in 305 Diocletian deciding to abdicate. And remember, Diocletian was the emperor that kind of got the Roman Empire out of the crisis of the 3rd century and ended the Barracks Wars, or Barracks Emperor's civil wars. And when he decided to kind of restructure the empire into a more manageable way, he created something called the Tetrarchy, where he and another guy, his basically right-hand man, Maximian, would each become something called an Augustus, okay, kind of the lead emperor at the time. One in the east, Diocletian, because the east was more wealthy than the west, okay, and then Maximian would be in the west, okay. Each of them would be an Augustus, the head emperor. Each of them would immediately choose like an heir or someone to take over in case something happened to them, called a Caesar. Okay, that was their title, a Caesar. And of course, that would be Galerius in the east and Constantius in the west. Okay, and then if something happened to either Diocletian or Maximian, they too would step up and become an Augustus, and then they would then promote someone else quickly to become the new Caesar, okay? And we're going to have that happen in a minute. And so what ends up happening is Diocletian decides that he just wants to retire. He's getting older in age, and he wants to go farm for a few years, and he retires to the coast of Dalmatia here, which is present-day Croatia, and he retires to a city that eventually becomes the city of Split, and he builds a little palace, and he starts farming turnips. And he forces his right-hand man to step down as well. He says, no, we're going to give both of our Caesars a chance to rule. And so Constantius and Galerius both become the new Augusti, these two guys here. At that point, both of them immediately promote someone else to become their next Caesar, okay? The new Caesar, underneath them, their second in command. Well, the following year, in 306 CE, okay, Constantius, the Augustus of the West, dies unexpectedly in Britain, in the city of York. His son, Constantine, pictured right here in this statue, is proclaimed by Constantius's former soldiers as to be their new leader. They want him to be the new leader, and Constantine's like, yeah, I like this idea. Let's do it. And so he becomes the Augustus of the West, even though there was already, the Caesar of the West had already been promoted to that point, okay? Immediately after finding out about Constantius' death, that Caesar becomes the new Augustus. So there's technically now two Augustuses of the West, or Augusti in the West, and one in the East, okay? Which would be Galerius still. Well, at that point, the guy that Constantius had as his Caesar, okay, and is now the new Augustus, as well as Constantine, has already promoted someone else to be a new Caesar as well, okay? Eventually, Constantine, gets into a fight with that new Augustus and that new Caesar, okay? And so they have a civil war on that side of the empire in the West. Well, at that point, the Caesar over there decides, heck, my guy can't defeat Constantine by himself. I'm going to declare myself as an Augustus and promote someone else as a Caesar. And kind of the same thing happens on the other side of the empire as well. And so you have multiple Caesars kind of at this point declaring themselves as Augusti, and then promoting someone else sometimes, and then them just deciding, I don't want to go under this guy, I'm going to promote myself. And so we end up having absolute chaos, and especially by the year 310, after 4 years of this, you have basically now 5 Augusti, give or take, including another guy called Maxentius, okay, which is at one point also one of the 5, okay? At most you end up ever having 5 fighting at one point, but that's still 5 different sides in a civil war at one point is absolutely crazy. And Maxentius was Maximian, Diocletian's right-hand man's son, who a bunch of Maximian's former troops were like, we like you should take over since there's a bunch of chaos. And so, absolutely crazy period during this time, but just understand that at this point, and at a single time, there are up to 5 different Augustuses, or Augusti, fighting for control of the empire, and usually no Caesars to take over if they die, because immediately when they promote someone as Caesar, that guy goes, well, I don't want to just be a Caesar, I want to be an Augustus. And so we end up having complete civil war across the entire empire. And over time, Constantine starts really winning on the West, in the West, okay? He starts really doing great in the West, okay? Defeats the other two and decides to start marching towards Rome. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. But first, in 311, he decides to write letters back to this guy, Licinius, one of the Augusti, or now Augustuses, over in the east, okay? Licinius and Constantine are writing letters back and forth, and the two of them decide that they want to stop the persecution of Christians that had happened under Diocletian. Because Diocletian started it, the Great Persecution. Okay, there had been previous ones under Nero and Domitian that we've talked about. But other than that, really Christians hadn't been persecuted. But when Diocletian took over, heavy persecution of Christians. And so that hadn't really stopped because of this civil war, okay? There hasn't been any time to tell everybody to stop doing that. And so it's kind of continued a little bit just because it had been ordered by Diocletian. And so Constantine and Licinius agree that, yes, there's no reason to persecute Christians. Let's stop that. And so they order it in the Edict of Tolerations together. They declare a document across the entire empire, but really only affects the areas that each of them at that point had controlled. Licinius was kind of winning in this side, and Constantine was winning in these two areas, Gaul and Britain, but it didn't affect everywhere else yet. Eventually it would take place everywhere else when they do control everything else. But that would take a little bit more time, okay? That wouldn't be immediately in 311. But that's the Edict of Tolerations, is to tolerate these Christians, okay? Stop killing them. In 312, Constantine decides that he's basically won over here, and he can just march towards the city of Rome and basically defeat Maxentius, Maximian's son, okay? Because he is the only other guy in the West at this point. Maxentius defeated one of the others. And so, at this point, you've basically got Licinius ruling over here, and then Maxentius in the middle, and then Constantine over here. So it was 5, now it's basically 3. And so, eventually, Constantine and Maxentius are going to have a battle in the city of Rome, or just outside the city of Rome, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, okay? And so it's going to be Maxentius versus Constantine. And so, and that's in 312. Well, okay. So, Constantine was born in the year 272, and he will live until the year 337. He's basically emperor from 312, when he starts kind of like beating everybody. But really 306, I guess you could argue, but really not he was at civil war from 306 to 312, okay? And then he'll live until 337, being emperor then. He worshipped a god known as Sol Invictus, okay? Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus was one of the Roman gods representing the sun, kind of like Apollo that the Greeks used to worship. But over time, Sol Invictus became this new god of the sun in Rome, okay? And became one of the more prominent Roman gods in general anyway. Okay, and represents the sun and golden orbs and stuff like that at this time. Well, he marches his army to the city of Rome, and it's late when he gets to the city of Rome, or outside the city of Rome, and he and his army decide that they're going to make camp right next to the Tiber River. Okay, remember the Tiber River flows through the city of Rome. Okay, and he realizes he's going to have to make camp there because it's too late in the day to basically march into the city, and Maxentius, okay, the other Augustus of the West, because they've both declared themselves Augustuses, has his army in Rome, okay, and there's a specific bridge to get into the city of Rome across the Tiber River, and that's called the Milvian Bridge. And so both of them know that they're going to be fighting at that bridge the next day. Well, Constantine, when he goes to sleep that night, has a vision in his dreams, okay? Or possibly before he goes to sleep. We're not exactly sure. The story kind of varies. But we do know that he says that he wakes up saying that he had a vision the night before, and that this vision was basically described or is painted in this picture with Constantine here, looking up in the sky and seeing a symbol. Now, that carried aloft by angels. Now, of course, it wouldn't be exactly this symbol. This is a later painting of a later period. This is during the Renaissance period, this painting was, I believe. And it's a cross. Well, actually what he saw was this symbol right here, called the chi rho. The chi rho is two letters, the chi and the rho, okay, the X and the P, which are both Greek letters, and those are the first two letters of Christ's name, okay, the chi, CH, and then R for rho, but really it's the really first three letters of Jesus Christ's name, okay, but it's kind of, back then there was only two, because CH were one letter at the time. And so he kind of sees this sign, and he had heard about Christianity. He knew obviously about Christianity and about Jesus and things like this. And so he kind of decides that he's been given this vision by God and by Jesus that he's going to succeed, okay? And so he orders his men that morning to start painting this symbol on all of their shields and all of their equipment and stuff like that, or at least put it on their shields, and even on their flags quickly if possible, okay? And so it is kind of the beginning of Christianity in the Roman Empire as being led by a Christian, but not quite, not exactly, okay? Because he hasn't converted to Christianity. He's just kind of beginning to believe more in Christianity because of this vision. Well, later that day, he actually does go to fight Maxentius, and they do fight on the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, that is the name of the battle, across the Tiber River, okay? And his army, okay, Constantine's army, defeats Maxentius, the other Augustus of the West. So now it is Constantine in the West and Licinius in the East, okay? And so he's won, and he believes it was very much because of this vision where he saw this symbol in the sky, not the cross, but a very similar symbol to the cross, very close to it, okay? And that was an original symbol of the Christians at the time, okay? Let's move on. Immediately after the Battle of Milvian Bridge, he decides to write letters back and forth with Licinius, who at this point had won the civil war in the East, and so we now have peace where Licinius is going to rule the East, and Constantine will be ruling the West, okay? And so peace after the Milvian Bridge battle. In 313, okay, they end up deciding to write letters back and forth again and co-declare the Edict of Milan in 313. Both Licinius and Constantine both declare the Edict of Milan, where Christianity isn't just now tolerated, it is now legal across the entire empire to worship it, okay? And not only is it legal, it is now the favored religion of the entire Roman Empire, because Licinius was basically Christian as well at this point, okay? And Constantine hasn't yet been baptized, and isn't technically a Christian yet, but he's kind of worshipping a lot of the ideas of the Christians and liking what he's hearing, okay? And so Constantine and Licinius now have made Christianity the favored and, hopeful religion of the Roman Empire is what they're both hoping. They're hoping that people will start converting from the Roman religion of the Pantheon and stuff to the different, to Christianity, okay? Or the different other religions worshipped throughout the empire to Christianity, okay? A few years later, in 321 CE, Constantine declares Sun's Day, okay, as a rest day, which is where we kind of get the day Sunday, okay, because Sunday as declared as a day of rest, which was is kind of mentioned in the Bible as the day of rest, okay, but Sun's Day, the original name for Sunday of each week, declared as a rest day, and that was, Constantine did that in 321. Licinius and Constantine, eventually their friendship kind of ends, and both of them kind of decide to declare war on each other in 324, so after about 12 years of peace between the two sides, and so war breaks out, and eventually Constantine defeats Licinius and is now the sole emperor of all of the Roman Empire, okay, both halves, Licinius's half as well as his former half, as well as his half, okay? And so Licinius is dead, and defeated, and so now Constantine is sole emperor of the whole empire from 324, basically, to 337, okay? But he's emperor, from 312 when he won the Battle of Milvian Bridge, when he kind of really took over the West. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about Constantine as the emperor, okay? In 325, the following year after defeating Licinius, he's going to declare the Council of Nicaea. Okay, Council of Nicaea. A lot of people pronounce it Nicaea. Either one is fine. Nicaea, Nicaea, whichever one you want to pronounce. I pronounce it both ways sometimes, so either one is fine. Okay, and we're going to talk quite a bit in detail about that in a few minutes. He also allows Christians, as well as pagans, those from the Roman religions and other religions, at his royal court, okay? He is actually not baptized until his deathbed. When he is actually dying in bed as an old man in the year 337, he decides to finally be baptized and become a Christian. Until then, he really likes the Christians, but he is not one himself. He is still kind of worshipping Sol Invictus and mostly, but a lot of ideas of Christianity he's kind of worshipping as well, okay? It's kind of interesting. He unifies the empire, obviously, by first, doing the civil wars here, finally defeating Maxentius and really declaring all of the West is his, and then eventually against Licinius, okay? And this lasts until 337 when he dies, okay? From 324 to 337, the empire is united. After that, chaos erupts because Constantine makes a big mistake. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Later on in this lecture, at the very end of this lecture. Or at least right before the last video, at the beginning of the last video, we'll talk about that. And then he also builds the city of Constantinople right here. Constantinople is built right here, okay? It's built right on the kind of straits right here. Remember this when we were talking about the Greeks? And let me focus in a little bit better here. You can kind of see there's the straits of water that go from the Aegean Sea next to Greece through here to the Black Sea. Well, there's a little town right there called Byzantium, okay? It's a small little fishing port town. Not very big, not very important, but it's on this side of the water, of the strait, okay? This side, okay, on the Greek side, as opposed to the Asia Minor side. And he decides that that's a really important place, because if anyone was to attack from the east and try to gain and cross over here, they would try to cross over at the thinnest water areas as possible, unless they had a really big navy. And so that would be a really important city to control. He starts duplicating many of the cities in Rome. Basically just he says, hey, architects, I want that building. Not moved, because we can't move it brick by brick, but we can copy that exact building and build it in my new city of Constantinople. Okay, and that's what he renames Byzantium. Okay, so Byzantium, the little town of Byzantium in 330 starts getting rebuilt as the new city of Constantinople. He makes it the new capital of the entire Roman Empire. And he also says that that this is really important, and it is really important strategically, not just because he says it, but it really gives access to the Black Sea area and trade through the Aegean and Mediterranean to the Black Sea. And at this point, Rome was kind of beginning to trade with a couple client kingdoms and stuff and allies up here. Okay? Moving on, let's talk a little bit about early Christianity in the next video and some of the changes and stuff with that. As well as the Council of Nicaea, or Nicaea, which is thanks to Constantine. Okay? And we'll talk about that in the next video.